Breaking news, new testimony from the diplomat who says he overheard a phone call between President Trump and EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland, of course, who is a crucial witness coming next week. So this is brand new. David Holmes has testified basically behind closed doors. As we speak, it's ongoing. But according to the New York Times, the information that's already coming out about this, Holmes telling lawmakers right out the gate that he heard Sondland tell Trump, Ukraine's president loves your, and an expletive. Sondland also telling Trump, Ukraine's president will do anything you ask him to do about these investigations. Holmes also saying after the call he asked Sondland if it was true that he didn't give another expletive about Ukraine. Sondland responding, Trump only cares about big stuff that helps the president personally, like the Biden probe that Giuliani was pushing. That is a damning admission in this new testimony. Holmes also says something that will be tantalizing, according to the New York Times, for this probe. Two other witnesses also could corroborate this very, very damning phone call. This is all brand new, and it's ongoing, and it's unfolding, and we're thrilled to have someone with experience in congressional investigations, former federal prosecutor John Flannery. Good evening to you, sir. This is one of those nights, a lot going on. The New York Times is literally doing real-time. Earlier in the day, there was real-time alleged witness tampering. Now there's real-time readouts of what's happening in these private depositions. Your response to the headline here, which is another official independently confirming that after Trump did the infamous Ukraine presidential call, he was back on the phone trying to get this plot executed and get Biden investigated.
Well, I think it's dynamite. I mean, you know, they keep talking about it. We only have hearsay. Well, a statement that is against your own interest, a confession, is the strongest kind of hearsay. And here you have the president basically say, I don't care about Ukraine. I only care about getting at this investigation. And this guy loves my blank, and that's all I need, and I'm going forward with it. And we have three witnesses who overheard it because the phone call was so loud in the restaurant they could all hear what was said. And immediately afterwards, David Holmes told someone else. So we have a contemporaneous corroborating event. And you know what? This is really dangerous for Sondland. What is he going to say when he testifies under oath? Is he going to forget this? Is he going to have to be refreshed? He's in a difficult position, I think.
Well, exactly. And again, I'm working here off the reports we're getting out. We've had our reporters, NBC and MSNBC, obviously all over the hearing rooms. But this was initially reported by CNN and is now a New York Times report. And reading from the New York Times, to your point, John, it says Sondland didn't mention this incident to investigators when he answered their questions in private. He will almost certainly be asked about it next week in his blockbuster hearing. He's already revised his initial testimony once. What does it say to you that Sondland appears under pressure to be coughing up more and more incriminating details about Donald Trump? How does that go into the available evidence in the bribery case?
It's because Sondland is on the side of the irregular channel. You know, you may remember Jared wanted a channel to go with Russia. Well, they had this irregular channel, and they wanted to move Yovanovitch out of the way, and Sondland for a whole month was free to do what he needed to do. And I'm suspicious after the testimony today that what Yovanovitch was saying very carefully was the two associates of Rudy Giuliani who were interested in this liquid natural gas project, they weren't going to get past her front door. And that may be an additional reason why she was moved out. But they never counted on Taylor coming up to speed as quickly as he did and finding out what was going on in that irregular channel. And it's sort of like the cops that, you know, the Keystone cops, they don't know what they're doing. And Sondland opened the door and said ridiculous things that allowed Taylor to know the full story. So these guys were caught with their hand in the cookie jar, committing the crime of bribery and extortion, and probably for a monetary basis having to do with a secret deal involving liquid natural gas. And that's why Bill Perry was in this mess from the Energy Department.
Rick Perry.
I'm sorry, Rick Perry, excuse me.
Yeah,
I went to school with Bill Perry.
Yeah. Hey, it happens to all of us. What you're laying out also goes back to what was elucidated in this morning's impeachment hearing, which is they didn't want this to happen. Right now, the New York Times reporting that there are official additional witnesses to the call. This diplomat who testified this morning would be one of those. This is exactly why they were trying to clear out, according to, at least to the impeachment investigators on the Democratic side, why they're trying to clear people out so they could get at the plot. John, stay with me. I want to bring back in Maya Wiley, a colleague of both of ours here. And Maya, when you look at this account, And you have, again, I'm reading from the Times on the breaking story, the official David Holmes testifying privately. He was also in the Ukrainian restaurant, heard the call if Ukraine's president had agreed to conduct investigations. Sondland replied yes to the president. Sondland then tells the president that Zelensky of Ukraine loves you effectively and would do these investigations along with, quote, anything you ask him to. Does that look to you like additional evidence of a bribery conspiracy?
Yeah, I would call that a bombshell. I mean, it's literally a bombshell because the only very weak and unsubstantiated defense that we've heard that might, if there was any evidence to support it, might get Donald Trump out of this is that he actually was concerned about real corruption. This takes that completely off the table and goes straight to personal gain, you know, whether it's bribery, whether it's extortion or any other abuse of power, at the center of every single one of those, every single one being impeachable, is personal gain. So really
let me
what
read
this does
to your point,
gain.
Maya. I want to add evidence to your point, and you can continue the analysis again from the Times, brand new story. This is, according to this new witness, what was happening on the call, with Sondland saying, look, the ambassador replied, Mr. Trump only cared about the investigations Giuliani was pushing for. Again, quoting from the Times, quote, because they affected him personally. I mean, it's literally Sondland, who's the Trump person, providing the element of that crime. And you can see up on the screen a little more from this, that he didn't give and you have a swear word there, I'm not going to say on TV, about Ukraine. Trump only cared about the big stuff, the investigations that Giuliani was pushing for, because they affected him, quote, personally, Maya.
Yeah, so this is, and I think John is absolutely right when he says, look, now the problem is Sondland is now named as an additional witness to this bombshell that removes any defense, any credible defense anyone might mount on Donald Trump's behalf on the fact that he was using the levers of government and undermining national security for his own personal gain. So one of the things that we heard from Bill Taylor early this week, which goes to Zelensky's state of mind, right, in the he loves Trump so much. Of course, he doesn't love Trump so much. What Taylor told us was on July 10th, the Ukrainians were already alarmed, is the word that Taylor used, alarmed, because they already learned that the meeting that they had thought that they were going to get with Donald Trump was in jeopardy. So they knew that there were issues already. Well, now the whole point of this, like, puts it squarely in Donald Trump's state of mind, is clear intent for personal gain. It's intentional.
Right.
There's nothing left then to defend.
And that's why having these witnesses in is so significant. Both of you stay with me in our breaking coverage. I want to bring in another reporter who has been along for a lot of these rides. The Daily Beast's Margaret Carlson joins our coverage. And Margaret, I actually want to play you some sound from the Republicans in the Wednesday hearing, which is so relevant tonight. I think we don't have I think we can get it. Republican hearing I'm talking to my control room, Margaret. It's D5. No one else needs to know what that means, but it's a quote from the Wednesday hearing, Margaret, because a lot of the Republicans have said, well, if it's all secondhand, if it's all hearsay, what good is it? Do we have that? We're going to pull that up. And Margaret, the reason why I want to play that is we're looking at an account right now of someone who was not hearsay, but was literally listening to the president's voice. Take a listen.
I know nothing about that. First time I've heard it. In any event, it's more secondhand information, but I've never heard it.
Do you recall having a conversation with
I don't recall. No, not at all. Not even a little bit.
Thank you. Margaret, your view?
The details of this call, I think for about 5 people at the table, it wasn't hearsay because Ambassador Sondland held the phone away from his ear because Trump was speaking so loudly. That violates so many security rules. But aside from that, it means that everyone heard it at the table. So there are a number of other people that can be called. And the hearsay objection, you know, there are more exceptions to the hearsay rule than there are rules to follow. So it's not a good argument. And he's, of course, depriving Democrats of any of the firsthand witnesses.
Maya?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Donald Trump, one of the articles of impeachment he's facing is obstruction. And obstruction of Congress is exactly why, on one hand, Republicans and Donald Trump are saying, hearsay, hearsay, all you have is hearsay. At the same time, they're the ones blocking witnesses with direct knowledge. But fortunately, because we have public servants who see their obligations to be accountable to Congress when they receive a subpoena, coming forward and telling what they know. You know, they're going to be, if all they can do at this point is say hearsay, that's tantamount to we have no evidence to counter this, because all we can do is try to keep people with knowledge from Congress, from sharing information. That's exactly when you're sitting on the other side of the fence as a lawyer saying, that looks guilty.
Yeah. And so, John, what I mentioned a little bit earlier, I want to go ahead and tee that up for everyone. Take a look.
Okay.
Officials' alarm at the president's actions was typically based on second-hand, third-hand, and even fourth-hand rumors and innuendo.
We got 6 people having 4 conversations in one sentence, and you just told me this is where you got your clear understanding.
Well, we're not in a court, gentlemen. And if we were, the Sixth Amendment would apply, and so would rules on hearsay and opinion. And most of your 2 testimonies would not be admissible whatsoever.
And so, John, I almost wonder whether some of these individuals just didn't look ahead to who the other scheduled witnesses were going to be, because I think the panel has spoken about the limits of that on substance. But there's also the fact that if your main complaint is, hey, who heard the president directly? Well, now there's a lot of that, too, tonight with this Times story.
Well, there's a short primer that they seem to need. These guys supposedly pass laws that have to do with what we do with evidence. And if I admit to a crime and you hear it, that's hearsay. But it's considered reliable because I'm saying something against my own interest. And that's why it's the strongest kind of evidence, even though the president's statement, you hear it said. There's another exception that's critical here, and I don't think impeachment can handle all of it. We have all of these people involved in a conspiracy, and there's an exception to the hearsay rule for people who are in a criminal agreement, and they all are, making statements in furtherance of that agreement, conspiratorial statements. They're hearsay, and they're admissible. And most of the evidence we've heard when they're saying you said, and hearsay, it shows 2 things. One, they don't have any idea what hearsay is and what's admissible, although that's what they write the laws about. And maybe they're just trying to be ignorant to the public, so they'd say, oh, that's just hearsay. I don't know what that means. What it means is we have the strongest possible case against any president who's ever had to face an impeachment effort, with real-time evidence of the crime and admissions being given to our attention, even as they try to prevent us from knowing the evidence they have. And it's ironic that they say, well, you have this hearsay, when they're concealing the other witnesses who have direct testimony. Bolton should be ashamed. If he has evidence, he should come forward or forever be banned from any public office in this country. And there's a whole bunch of these people. The reason impeachment's not enough is because we have a conspiracy of people, and if we remove this president, we still have all these people. We have a corrupt person heading the Department of Justice. We have somebody heading the State Department we can't rely on. That is not a government that's in good shape. That's a government at risk. That's a constitutional violation. This is a crisis of the first and historic order. And if John Meacham's still around, I'm sure he'd say exactly that.
Well, John, I mean, you know, it is interesting. No, it's interesting hearing your emphatic constitutional passion. I want to bring in not John Meacham, but the Root's Jason Johnson, who joins our special coverage as well. We're in rolling coverage given this breaking story. Good to see you, Jason. Good to see you. The detail I'm about to mention from the New York Times story is one we haven't reached yet. And I don't just mention it, although I am admittedly a fan of the musician, but that's not why I bring it up. I bring it up because of the evidentiary specificity of it. Near the end of the Times article, they note that in addition to the other items mentioned, the president asked Mr. Sondland, quote, about A$AP Rocky, an American rapper imprisoned in Sweden at the time. And I mentioned that Mr. Rocky's case is one that we covered on this show, in fact. But, Jason, I mention it because it speaks to the very detailed account we have here. It's not just people who were in the State Department saying, oh, I heard one big thing, or I heard a bad thing about Donald Trump, or maybe some of them are disagreements with Donald Trump about policy. This seems to be the kind of accounting that is provable, that can be corroborated, where multiple witnesses are saying the president and Sondland talked about these 7 things, and these 5 were about Ukraine, and these 3 were about bribery, and here's other things that may or may not be as important today. I am really struck by the details in here. I wonder what you think that does to the evidence in a rapidly accelerating impeachment probe.
Well, it shows, Ari, that a whole bunch of people were taking notes, right? They were taking time, taking place and taking notes. They wanted to know where he be at, where he dresses at. Everything about what Donald Trump does has become very important to many of the men and women involved in the State Department. And why is that? It's not because they were part of the deep state. It's not because they were out to get him. It's because he has created a culture of paranoia. He's created a culture of corruption. And so these people who have spent their entire lives trying to protect nations, trying to protect the United States and U.S. interests, have made it their life's mission. I've got to write this down. I've got to remember every phone call. I've got to remember who's walked in this room or that room, because if they don't, they might get caught up in the whirlwind of corruption. So I'm not surprised by this. And I know that Donald Trump was very concerned about ASAP Rocky because he thought it was going to be beneficial for him in the elections in 2020. But it speaks to the fact that every single person around this president and the people connected to him, they have to have their head on a swivel.
Yeah, and it speaks to the credibility. Go ahead, Margaret. I was just going to say it speaks to the credibility of these individuals. These are longtime public servants. They seem to have, Margaret, attention to detail.
That's what I wanted to mention, which is you could juxtapose Roger Stone today walking out of the courtroom having been found guilty, and Marie Yovanovitch. Just look at the two of them, and who do you trust? You know, what we've seen the last 2 days, or the last 3 days, is the deep state. Right. You know, your check is in the mail is a punchline about bureaucrats, but we should stop for a moment. They don't ask for us to thank them, and it's good because we don't. We make jokes about them. But these are the people that make the government we live under work. And you know, at the end of today, there was a spontaneous outburst of applause for former Ambassador Yovanovitch. So well deserved. I mean, if I get one call from the police station, I want it to be to her because I know she would do the right thing. And I don't see those people around Donald Trump. When Donald Trump sees a person like that, he smears them and gets rid of them.
Right. Well, and that I think what you just said is what ties together all of it. The idea that while even in her careful testimony, she didn't say or speculate on exactly the workings of the plot of why they wanted to get rid of her, it's all implied because she would be the person who would act like the adult or like the honest person or the police officer, whatever you want to call it, the person who says, stop, we can't do this. And Ambassador Taylor, Jason, was also that person, which goes to the other thing I wanted to get to that we haven't even had time to hit yet, which is while Ken Starr and others on Fox News today were critical of the president's attacks, the other defense we're seeing, and I'm about to play for you from Laura Ingraham on Fox News in defense of the president, was, well, because people like Bill Taylor and others objected, and then because of the whistleblower, and because Congress got involved and stopped this, because of all that, well, it was only attempted, and thus it's not really impeachable. Take a look.
Attempted bribery isn't in the Constitution. Remember, Ukraine got its military aid. It was 14 days delayed. Big deal. Democrats think they're cats. They have 9 political lives when it comes to impeachment. None of these people should be taken seriously because they know they do not have a legitimate case for impeachment, and they're going forward with it anyway.
Jason?
Weinstein would ever go into court and say, I tried to assault you, but you beat me off of you, so I guess I'm good, right? Like, that's essentially the argument that the right has at this point, that we were attempting to bribe someone, we were attempting to manipulate foreign policy to put money in the pockets of Rudy Giuliani, but since we weren't successful, you can't hold us accountable for it. I don't know how that works in the court of law. I don't know how that works in the court of public opinion, and it certainly doesn't work to have a functional democracy operate with an entire political party and an entire media outlet saying that incompetence is the reason that we can't be held responsible for attempts to break the law and violate sovereignty.
30 seconds, Flannery, bribery in the Constitution.
Well, bribery in the Constitution, I mean, to say that you could defy our American policy toward Ukraine, withhold funds at a time of war in Ukraine, make a demand to get help in a presidential contest, and say that's not a high crime and misdemeanor, that's not a bribery, that's not extortion, is to suspend all belief in a way that the Republicans would like us to do, but I think the Americans are a lot smarter than that. And we'll find out in the holiday ahead when they all have to go home and talk in their districts.
Well, quite a set of stories we've been following. My thanks to John, Maya, Margaret, and Jason, to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.